Okay, so we've seen lots of quite interesting technologies, and then some of those work we saw in this session is more sort of like a kind of live interaction or communication between the people. So for example, one of the technologies like a mobile portation is going to sharing the kind of the location of the one person is where, and the other person sees the kind of whole picture of those things, right? And so this is also the kind of question from the audience. But then of course, this is a research, and then the prototypes sometimes are bulky, a little bit bigger. But how do we think we can make our solutions we saw here less intrusive in the experience? So that's the kind of questions from the audience. Does anyone want to say something about this?
In terms of mobile portation specifically, so I was running an experiment on a phone from 2015, and it's gotten a wee bit better these days. So, so the reason we need the 360 camera on the back of it, which is the only thing that makes it not fully ubiquitous, not something you carry around with you, is because camera on the back only had a 80-degree field of view or something. But basically, every flagship phone these days has an ultra-wide lens as well, which is usually about 120 degrees. So, yeah, we could already get to a state where it's just purely on a single phone. It's not going to be exactly the same as sticking the 360 camera on the back because you're not getting that full view, but it is entirely possible with just one phone at this point now.
Anybody else? Want to say something? I think another thing. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe a short comment. I really appreciate this question because I mean, at the end, our concepts have to be used by real people, but we are working on concepts. We are working on concepts for the future, and we as UX designers or whatever we call ourselves or explorers, we should make the best of what we have today to explore what the future should look like. So other people know who are actually building the hardware, the industry knows who's building the hardware, what they should build. So I totally appreciate the question, but in a research context, I always feel like, okay, yeah, maybe that's relevant and that might have implications on our studies, but is that the actual question we should solve? That's just a comment from my side.
Of course, if we have like a more, kind of realistic prototype, we can also run another development study where we can also see more, actual user experience, right? So that's also a great value for the research. So another question.
Koji, before
Yes.
you move on, I think someone in the chat asked us the first presentation to also chime in on this point. We use a commercial head-mounted display, the Microsoft HoloLens, as a 3D spatial AR display to show annotated information on top of the heads of audience members while giving presentations. So yes, in our study, we asked extensively both the audience and the presenters what they felt about wearing the bulky head-mounted display. And almost everyone mentioned that one important drawback of this is the loss of eye contact between the audience and the presenter. And also the presenters did mention that at the beginning they felt they're wearing something, so their attention was going towards it. But after practicing for a while, they got used to it. And I agree with Christian's comment that we are using what is available to us currently, but we have hope that with the studies that we conduct in the future, the manufacturers continue innovating and making the technology smaller and less intrusive. So hopefully there's new technology that comes up that's more easier to wear and looks more natural while using.
really nice. So I think that some of the work using AR, VR technologies as a medium to enable different kinds of applications. So that's the one of the great examples we saw in this session is to support this presentation, right? So get the kind of feedback from the audience during the presentations, which is nice. I also did a kind of similar work, but not the AR, VR. But we also see, for example, some sort of menu selection technique, as well as kind of evaluation methodologies, in my understanding, to see how immersive or not in those the VR experience, right? So that's, I think, all great examples. But at the same time, those AR, VR papers are also published at different kinds of the HCI related conferences, such as CHI, WIST, the VRSD, or IEEE VR, right? So I'm kind of wondering what the unique take we can potentially make as a UbiComp, right? So what unique research directions we should take as a UbiComp researchers, as opposed to, you know, other kinds of VR or AR researchers. Any thought?
I guess I'll go again. So yeah, a lot of these VR and AR technologies we're looking at, it's all kind of stuff that's portable. It's stuff that you want to be able to take anywhere with you. So if you look at a lot of the VR and AR research out there at the moment, if you go to IEEE VR or CHI or something, you see it's all usually desktop systems, and they'll have like 6 Titan XP cards set up. It's just not really practical for the average user. So it's kind of pushing this idea that the mobile phone is kind of, or mobile technologies in general, it's they are valid. They are a valid platform for research, and there's a lot of different opportunities they provide that you can't get on a desktop system, even with the drop in performance.
Okay, any other comments, thoughts?
Yeah, maybe. So what I've seen, my PhD was mainly about taking these things out of the lab into the real world and making them ubiquitous to be available and usable everywhere. And we have this beautiful research about mixed reality interaction with AR, VR devices. Where are the borders? Where do we switch? We saw this. Sorry, I forgot. What was it? The dyadic mirror? No, where I was walking through a room and people could follow me when a remote while I was scanning my room. So these are what are the concepts? How do we float between these states, and how do we make this interactable and not confusing? And how does it, you know, in the past we had this idea of having smartphones and having, you know, augmented reality world, whatever, or we're having screens everywhere. Is that actually the case for the future? How does it work out when we put everything on the head and we have the screens everywhere? Mm-hmm. So finding guidelines for that's basically what I'm interested in.
Okay. So more sort of a real world experience of those AR VR technology is something that IMWAT or UbiComp should cover. Any other opinion? I think that's a good point too.
I think another one is kind of an interesting direction is how we can use technologies to provide affordances for those who are impaired as well. So for example, in our study, we compared the phone to the head-worn display, and an aspect where the head-worn display really excelled at, or for example, was stairs. So in that case, when our participants were going up and down stairs, a lot of times the head-worn display still allowed them to do their task, like reading captions, versus the phone, they would put it on their side or they would put it away. And so these kind of affordances for specific populations of people would also be an interesting direction to go in.
Good. So, okay, any other thoughts? Otherwise, let me pick up some questions from the audience. Oh, so the paper A brings up interesting comparison of regional reactions to technology solutions, which is, I think, the perception study of the on-screen display. What do other authors think might be different regional perspective on their solutions?
I can maybe try to highlight some instances from our study. We were looking for the face mask use and how we can convey the emotion from the face mask use. And in our study, like all of the participants except one was living in a certain country in Turkey, and the other one, the exception was Denmark. And in this study, we specifically found the responses were highlighting that the mask use itself, for instance, was culturally different from these two countries. Because, like, for instance, in Denmark, because the people at that time were not using masks, the social acceptability responses of that participants varied in that sense when we compare to the others. So the overall social acceptability or cultural norms especially are important for those interactive contexts. And there was again a follow-up question about it, about especially the visual and vibrational feedbacks needs to consider the cultural context and how we can provide generalizable solutions to that. In our experiences, I think we, as a research field, we need to consider and understand those cultural differences. Generalizability in terms of those cultural influences are kind of a secondary concern, in my opinion. But as a research field, we need to understand the driving factors and parameters behind those cultural decisions, I can say.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I think that's the cultural background really matters to how people perceive different kinds of interface or how they use. So, of course, the technology for everyone should be designed for everyone, but the interface or user experience may depend on the cultural differences, right? So that's something we should really consider and evaluate as a community. And then I think in that sense, the UbiComp is a really great place because we have the researchers are on those, doing the network or, those middleware type of things, right? But we also have the researchers who work on more sort of the upper layer so that, they can also design more, for example, work on those cultural differences, all that stuff, right? So with those things, with the combination of those the researchers, I think we can do quite interesting mix of the research. So that's why I like the UbiConf very much. But any other thoughts? Yeah, so the face mask is a great example, and then I also like the dyadic mirror as well. So it's rather, dyadic mirror those the prototypes wouldn't be very simple, but it looks like a very simple technology, and that works pretty well. Right, so I think that's a great examples of of how those interface design could impact on the user experience. And I have a question about those didactic mirror. So with the example of the simple face mask, maybe a different way to do the didactic mirror that will not be so heavyweight. So instead of using the mobile phone, can we just use like a very simple display like what the face mask folks use, or even just a mirror? That was my question. Did you actually use a mirror, like a physical mirror, do a prototyping?
Yes. I mean, actually, we tried the physical mirror first time, and actually, of course, it is the simplest way and the most intuitive way to just mirror the face. Mm-hmm. But we found that the mirror itself does not provide a wide angle of the view. I mean, because it depends on the law of reflection. So just a few degrees away from the center, the person cannot see his or her face. Mm-hmm. So actually, so as an alternative, we tried to make it as a capturing using a camera and the displaying. So usually the camera provides wider angle. So for example, 60 degrees of field of view, it provides much wider, I mean, much more opportunity to capture the parent face in the real world. And for the first question regarding the simple face mask case, actually, I think it will work in some cases. For example, a parent is showing an extreme anger face. So we can just make a simple emoticon or some, I mean, faces, like a 6 sets of faces, facial expressions. But we also observed that some expressions are very subtle. I mean, the micro expressions, like just a few few hundreds of milliseconds of raising a eyebrow, that would also work as a expression of the internal state. So I think the simple face mask, I mean, current version cannot cover that much details, and we decided to show a natural face itself. I think if further the technology improves, then we can maybe provide much a lightweight solutions rather than the natural faces.
Okay, thank you very much. And I also got another questions from the audience to the authors of the face mask. So was comfort or weight a criterion while creating different designs? Were some technologies too heavy to be feasibly worn? So did you consider some sort of comfortability or weight as a criterion on when you design the exploration of those different kinds of the mask design?
Comfort was definitely a concern while designing our system, the face masks. However, the masks that we use in this study was used as in visitor-to-pose approach, so it didn't include any sensing technologies yet. But the design itself considered the placement of those technologies by making a hard case in which we can place those technologies. So, and we can replace and we can maintain the comfort while using those technologies, which is similar to the filters that current mask designs use. Like in terms of aesthetics and both comfort, we considered to use those casings specifically in the mask designs.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I think that's pretty much all from the audience, I guess. So any questions from the speakers? I think I forgot to ask. Or any discussion point you want to raise?
Not really a discussion point, but I would like to go back to this UbiComp discussion term, the last question we have in the chat. I mean, there's a long discussion about what ubiquitous computing is. For me, very short, is like I have a lot of objects around me that are all like intelligent and do stuff for me, and I don't really understand that they're doing good stuff. So I don't really recognize that they are a computer ideally, but they make my life better. But UbiComp is also including variables, right? So why is there a strong discrimination between a headset, so head-mounted display, VR, AR, and the ubiquitous computing term? Because basically a visual rendering I can see is like a haptic rendering on my skin, whatever, just in front of my eyes. So maybe I'm just not educated enough or don't know the field enough, but could somebody explain a little bit deeper why there's this feeling of we need something special for this topic, a special conference, for example.
Okay, I think that's quite great point, I think, to consider. So anybody has thought on that? Maybe some senior folks? No, really. So the Gregory says there is no distinction between UbiComp and AR, but Weiser talks about the VR being very different from UbiComp.
Yeah, I agree. AR definitely seems to have a role because it provides a way of at least providing a perception of having, displays and computing in the environment, even though it's not actually there. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it could be the same for VR too. So of course, when we think about environment and screens, we think about visual stuff, but we know there's a lot of other senses that we can use. So if I'm living in a virtual world and I decide to be in a virtual world visually, still the rest of the environment can be some kind of this ubiquitous stuff. I'm walking in my living room and I'm touching my table, for example. And my table now gives me another sensation instead of being a table. It gives me some more information by getting touched. So I have this idea of ubiquitous computing while being in a virtual world. It's still a conflict in my head, of course, but you know where I'm going for? Maybe we shouldn't see our reality that we all perceive as the reality that actually is the truth. Maybe there's more spaces.
Yeah, so I think that back in old days, I think the virtual reality systems, it really separates you from the real world, right? So you wear those goggles and then it's, you are sitting on a chair and then do some kind of the interactions, right? But, after I think number of the years, the VR technology also has been improved and then now you can buy it and you can just wear it at your home, right? And then that situation will be different from the old days because now, as you said, you can maybe touch your desks or some other, you can also interact with your own environment while you are still in the virtual world, right? So in that case, there might be some like a, kind of physical world the component in your virtual reality experience, which might be scope of the UbiComp. I think that's my understanding of the UbiComp is something about the real world, right? So either sensing or maybe user experience of the real world along with some kind of like a wearable or mobile technology or again, the display, public display type of technologies, right? Yeah, but I think the things are changing. So that's why we're gonna start seeing a fairly good number of the VR, AR. AR is I think still partially at the UbiComp, I guess, but the VR papers in IMWA and UbiComp. And then Gregory says that I think of UbiComp as blurring the distinction between the physical and the digital. Yeah, so it's kind of the blending the physical and the digital world, I think.
So another strange category is I've seen VR being used as a simulation environment for testing UbiComp concepts, right? Putting you in a simulated living room with embedded devices to see how well they work without actually having to go to the trouble of building them. So is that UbiComp?
That's true. Yeah, I think it's a great discussion. I think that's, we have seen many like emerging technologies and how that fit into UbiComp or how we can redefine the scope of the UbiComp. So that's, I think we should always try to. So any other thoughts on the presentations we saw in this session? Or any other questions from the audience? So I have a question. What is the technical challenges of the didactic mirror?
Okay. First of all, the technology aspect. There is no significant challenge. For example, just capturing the faces and mirroring. It does not have a significant technical challenge. But in terms of research itself, we have three research challenges, which are first, of course, integrating all the stops into one system. And second, designing a form factor for a child to wear several hours in their homes. It took a lot of effort, and actually we had several times of iterations, but which we introduced in the paper, but we omitted in the presentation. I think it'll be good to see the paper regarding the form factor issues. And the third and the last challenge is to access the private and sensitive data from the participants. Actually, it is quite really sensitive to capture each participant's home using video and asking their personal events and situations for a month. So we tried hard to carve out the interesting observations and findings, and also being familiar with the system and having a good relationship between participants and our researchers. And seems that, okay. There is another question.
Yeah, for you.
Important to see your face as opposed to having it to be described to you, just straight to your ear.
Well, this also goes back to a question raised earlier about putting an artificial face on there. I think it's extremely powerful to see your own face on a display. And I think a really interesting area of research would be putting other sorts of expressions on that face. So if you could see yourself in those situations with a smiling, cheerful face when you're actually screaming at the kid, what kind of effect does that have on people, right? So if you can manipulate it in different interesting ways, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. I think this is really useful. I think even not just for the childcare, but also some sort of meetings online. So sometimes, we kind of have the miscommunications, right? Whenever we have the Zoom meeting, all that stuff. So, sometimes, I say something, but, the other people take, in a different way, right? So, so that kind of miscommunication happens, particularly if you have meetings with my students, right? So I would like to have my own reflection tools so that, hey, I don't see like bad things, or, I might be more, generous to the students, all that stuff, right? So I think that's really useful. I think that's kind of nice to have like a quick reflection things, right? And then for that purpose, I think that seeing on my own face could be really powerful. At the same time, could be really easy to implement. So that's I think great things to know from this paper to me. Yeah, so we still have 4 or 5 minutes, and Gregory says. Yeah, so the Gregory's comment, the keynote this morning talked about using Google Glass to assist the eye contact for individuals with autism. Probably even better to use something like for didactic mirror. And can the pervasive display scheduling folks give a concrete example? So do you want to say something, Nigel or Mark?
Yeah, a concrete example of what? A concrete example of using the mirror? Well, I'm just trying to
using eye contact, I guess. I don't know. Using
if you're scheduling to an application. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think what we've tried to do in the paper really is construct a kind of framework for talking about scheduling in pervasive display. So you could use it for a whole bunch of different applications, and we do in the test bed. The one that's kind of really sort of exercising us at the moment is trying to kind of get it scheduling to the person. So kind of picking up the same framework and thinking about how you can change the way that you schedule content instead of scheduling to a display or to a network of displays, rather kind of scheduling it out to the person. So I kind of describe, so I might be able to say, oh, I want to make sure Mark sees this advert 10 times or something, rather than I want to show this piece of content on a particular screen at a particular time. And so we've just been kind of rolling some of that out for some kind of health and safety type work across campus, you know, obviously in the light of COVID. So where you're trying to make sure that particular groups of students get certain health messages, so tailored by, you know, kind of where the regions of town that they're living in, or the languages that they want to see the information. So you're really taking that scheduling and trying to kind of recreate the same sort of scheduling that you might have, you know, with something like, you know, adverts on the web, but try and translate that into the way that you construct the scheduling for the pervasive display networks. And then that becomes interesting, because then you need whole new systems for actually driving it as well. So, you know, the user interface that the folks scheduling content onto the network use becomes different as well. So I think, you know, in a way, if you took the paper, it's really a contribution to try and break down scheduling into some kind of framework that you can then work on the elements of it independently on a kind of the filtering and the policy stroke goal setting, and then use that for some new kind of applications. And particularly, I think, as I said, the one we've been focusing on is really sort of scheduling out to the person.
Cool, thank you very much. So it's almost a time, so let's wrap up. First, thank you for all speakers and also all attendees who asked the questions. Thank you very much. And then please do the voting for the best presentations in this session. So you go to Uber and then find the surveys under resources. I'm looking at the web-based the interface right now, but I'm not sure the mobile things, but probably the same. Go to the surveys and try to find the session feedback, and then click the session feedback. You try to find our session, which is the feedback for session 1B, displays tactile new interaction. And you can click on that, and then you can pick up one of the papers for the hours. Okay, thank you very much. And then let's move on to the gather town. So the general chairs placed lots of effort to make the social interaction work. So please try out the gather town if you haven't yet, and then just meet with new people and also meet with the speakers if you have more questions. Thank you very much, and see you there. Thank you.